I have often said that the lure of flying is the lure of beauty.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the final session of the 54th International Conference of Horseracing Authority organized by the IFHA. We hope you found our virtual conference informative, and as we have examined how pandemic has altered horse racing and other major sports. Today's panel will look ahead and focus on preparing for and sustaining racing in post-COVID-19 world. Despite the significant challenges facing the sport of horse racing during the pandemic, it's paramount that we in racing continue to proactively adapt to the changing circumstances and reinvent our relevance in the new normal to ensure racing's sustainability over the longer term. This session features 6 panelists from around the world, including myself. Joining me today will be Victoria Carter, who is the Deputy Chair of New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. She was previously a director of the Auckland Racing Club for 10 years. And she was awarded an Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2016 for services to the arts, business, and community. Horacio Esposito, who is the president of the Latin American Racing Channel. Additionally, he is an advisor on international affairs and a board member of the OSAF. Drew Fleming, who became the president and CEO of Breeders' Cup last November. He was formerly the CEO of Breeders' Cup and led the general day-to-day operations. Brian Kavanagh, who is the CEO of Horseracing Ireland, as well as one of my fellow vice-chairmen with the IFHA. He has been chief executive of HRI since establishment in 2001. And finally, Annamarie Phelps, who became the chair of the British Horseracing Authority in June of last year. She's also the vice chair of the British Olympic Committee and a former Olympic rower. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss horse racing's future.
Well, I guess the only way to start is by asking each one of you about the difficulties that the pandemic has brought upon each jurisdiction. Victoria, I'll start with you. And what weaknesses or what vulnerabilities has the pandemic highlighted in racing in New Zealand?
Well, just by background, in New Zealand we had a very stringent lockdown that started in March for just over a month, and that meant horses were unable to be trained. So then we had to bring them back into condition, which took another 7 weeks. So the resumption of racing took a while, and that meant when we got back to racing, we had a lot more horse numbers than we had anticipated. Big fields, and sometimes it was hard to get starts. But we expect that to abate fairly shortly. But in terms of the vulnerability that I think has been highlighted, as I reflected on your question, one of the things I thought about is people, because we're a sport that relies on large numbers of people who look after the horses, people who look after our race courses, and then all of the people that go to the race courses, that bet on the horses and attend for entertainment. And we have so many people engaged in our sport that were affected that the ongoing ramifications of that then roll into your fan engagement and people's interest in the horse. So I think we've got a lot of catch up to do.
I suspect a number of those themes will be in play with what Winfried and Annamarie say. Annamarie, what about you and Britain?
Yeah, I mean, we were quite lucky in comparison to Victoria. Obviously, we managed to keep our horses all in training. Some went out by choice, but actually the trainers and the stable yards continued working. So we didn't have this big long period, which meant that once we were able to start again, we could just get going. But I suspect that the most sort of unexpected vulnerability has been the vulnerability of ownership, actually, without being able to get our owners. And it comes back to Victoria's point about people, without them being able to get onto the tracks and experience their horses, get out to see them in the yards. The great enjoyment of ownership has sort of gone, that interaction. So that's proved quite tricky. And we've seen a drop of something like 18% in active ownership. So not necessarily dropping ownership, but actually just not engaging with it, which is quite good. And I think then for people, the reduced experience on the race course, people have got not able to get onto the race course, which has had an impact on our race courses. And I think what it's really highlighted is the vulnerability of certain business models that we thought were robust because they had revenue coming from multiple different directions, from ticket sales, from media sales, from all sorts of things. Suddenly find with that big chunk of race goers cut off, they are then very vulnerable, and therefore it's led to reduced prize money because they don't have the money to put into their prizes. So there's been a huge financial impact because of that, but not a simple correlation depending on racecourse size or whatever else. It's much more complicated.
Winfried, what was the situation like in Hong Kong? What weaknesses or vulnerabilities were revealed by the pandemic there?
I think, first of all, probably we were in a lucky position that we could continue races, and that we, in a way, could even continue racing with crowds, especially with owners, to keep, in a way, the owners' interest. Probably the biggest vulnerability was that we never planned for something like a public health crisis, which would last for a year or two. And therefore, we had business continuity plans, but they were not geared that they would last, in a way, for such a long period of time. And what we, in our risk management and business continuity plan, found out, there are areas where you're vulnerable while you have protected your key areas. If you look at your stable staff, the key operations, but some backhouse operations, which are key for keep your digital presence and hold our digital channels open, like a betting control center. And as soon as you have then A team, B team, C team, and only an A team and B team would not be enough, because if somebody in the A team or B team is hit, you practically have your whole digital connectivity with 2 million accounts down. So for us, it was the biggest vulnerable aspect was in the back office, where you see what are the bottlenecks, which in a way can bring down your whole revenue stream. So that was an interesting learning, because we never, and I think probably I speak for everybody, planned for a public health crisis in this dimension, which goes in every aspect. We could see the vulnerability of transport of horses, because we are depending that around 400, 500 horses are flown every year into Hong Kong to continue our normal racing program. So the problem was not the transport of the horses. It was a problem of grooms can go in a plane and not going into Hong Kong, stay in the plane and fly back to England or Australia. So we could find innovative solutions to overcome this. But it is really the agility and the learning every day, how you have to adapt to different situations. And again, all the business continuity plans, they are very theoretically, and if you really put them under test, you will see that you maybe have not thought about the black swan, which comes completely from the left side.
Yeah, opportunities to influence the impact of racing through this period. Winfried, what positives have you found in Hong Kong?
I think for us, we could really state and get a really endorsement by the government and the public that continue racing in Hong Kong is in the public interest. What I think you can talk about it, but this time it became obvious. It was the two key anchors, Wednesday and on the weekend, that people who are trapped at home had a purpose to look forward to the entertaining of racing. And we were able to generate over 6 billion Hong Kong dollars tax revenue. So therefore, that was something we always advocated, and we could make it really very visible. Then I think if you look internally, employees bonding together and licensed people bonding together to rally, really, that's the objective is to keep racing going. and that we have to all come together and make sacrifices in the interest of our sport. And that was a tremendous buy-in. And then I think it is, as an organization, it shows you too how important it is of collaboration, how you have to collaborate across an organization of our size with 7,600 full-time and 15,000 part-time employees, and how you have to keep agile and how you communicate that, in a way, why we do this, how we have clear risk assessment, that we are transparent, that we engage with our employees. And that, I think, has brought our organization much closer together. And the typical CEO talk, when you say, we need to become more agile, we have to be more collaborative. Now, it is an example that you have to. And this is, in a way, a wonderful opportunity for change, for introducing modern practices from really flexible work hours, work from home. That is, in a way, a unique opportunity we can really leverage to make our organization more modern and more resilient and more agile.
Well, it's interesting that Winfried picks up on that point about becoming more modern, more agile, having that dexterity to deal with whatever the situation is. Victoria, has racing or the pandemic forced racing to become more modern in its approach to, say, technology in New Zealand?
Yeah, I'm sure it's the same for all of us, that we've seen a rise in the use of technology. Look, we're having a conference on Zoom. And not just for communicating, but for watching racing and for systems. But I think, too, there's other aspects of cost savings and time savings from communicating in this fashion instead of getting on an aeroplane or driving long distances. You know, I think that there are some other gains that we will all make, which will be good for all of society.
Annamarie, what about the approach and improving the approach of using technology, for example, in the UK?
Well, certainly we're starting to get there. I think the intention is that, and we'd like to continue. But I think I agree. You know, Zoom meetings have transformed all business. And are going to really impact our foreign travel. But I do think it's important we get back to face-to-face, because there is nothing like sitting down with somebody over a cup of coffee across a table and really understanding them. So I really hope it doesn't change it to that extent. What can I add to what Victoria said? I suppose it's changed an awful lot. I mean, as well as the things that Winfried talked about in terms of the flexibility of working from home and the ability for people to be able to work in their own times, which we would never have imagined before this. We'd never have thought that an industry like racing, where you have to be with the horse or on the race course, would have any ability to flex. And obviously it's only in certain administrative roles you can do that. You know, the horse isn't going to be able to be fed virtually. But it has meant that there's been a greater ability, I hope, for different people to come in and be part of the industry. Some of the things that we need to do to really take advantage of technology that is exposed, that, you know, we can do, we probably need more investment. So, you know, we still have a number of databases where we could have just a single database that we could input to, and that would really help us in the UK in terms of saving staff time and resource. But we've certainly used more technology. We're beginning to use tablets more. That was sort of happening. I hope that this accelerates that and accelerates the investment into that. It's changed the way people bet in this country. You know, an awful lot more online betting now, because a lot of the LBOs closed for a long time during lockdown. So that's obviously altered all sorts of things, and we need to take that into account. And just things like, I mean, you know, one fantastic sort of technological innovation was, you know, Rishi, which you'll remember, was the broadcast of the virtual Grand National. I mean, who would have thought we would have nearly 5 million people watching a computer-generated jumps race in the wintertime? You know, it raised £2.5 million for NHS charities, and everybody that I know watched it. People were talking about it. It was all over social media. So even not a real race brought everybody to racing within the UK. It was fantastic. I'm not sort of suggesting we keep repeating that, but it shows what you can do with technology and virtual computer-generated sport.
Absolutely, I'm a huge fan of that because it engaged so many people that perhaps would never have had an interest in it prior to it, and I still back the loser. So it was the Grand National after all. Winfried, what about what the circumstances of the pandemic have forced with regards to technology and improvements in technology in Hong Kong?
I think we are probably one of the most digital connected organization to our customer base. So we have 2.5 million account customers. And therefore, we had already in racing, normally 15% were off-track betting centers, 5 to 7% was race courses. The other was tailor-bet centers, which was around 12%. So now, in a way, with this closing of OCBs, we could practically shift a significant number of customers who were purely cash to, in a way, accounts. So we used this opportunity when we had the window to reactivate around 250,000 accounts where people forgot their password. We could use it in a way to have faster payment system introduced where you probably instantly can transfer money between banks and the accounts, which our customers would probably not in this extent would have done. We are now the #1 fast payment system application in Hong Kong. So every race meeting, we have around 250,000 people use this to top up their accounts. Then we could introduce and convince the government that we have a smoother way and quicker way to open up betting accounts, where we can now with the e-wallet can open up an account within 1.5 to 2 minutes. So that were opportunities where we could even technology we wanted to implement to roll out faster and get a conversion and adoption rate you would never had in a normal world. And I think for me, if it comes to broadcasting, and that is something which I feel from technology we have to learn, especially if you have customers who normally prefer going to an OCB or to the racetrack, and where you have new customers who want to come, how you create a digital experience for newcomers, which makes it easier for them to connect to the sport. And the virtual Grand National, I think that are very gamifications of what we have, where we can make our sport known to people who normally not look at this and create an interest. And then hopefully we were able to convert them to become our regular customers. So technology for me, going forward, agility, technology, connectivity to customers directly is one of our key direction and how we have to think as racing to push this out even more.
I certainly believe all the opportunities that we've had through this situation has certainly helped in some respects, and I think you've all highlighted that. But one of the interesting aspects of what has happened over the last few months, I imagine, when people say there'll have to be lots of communication between jurisdictions and the respective governments. Some people may have taken a sharp intake of breath because that's not always the easiest thing to do. But I'm guessing that once forced into this situation, Victoria, that we have to make it work.
I think it's really been fascinating, actually. I think communications with government's always been critical. But I think for racing during COVID, we needed to be, as Winfried's shown, a key business generating revenue and keeping people in work and people entertained, not just on race days, but all the work that goes into getting a horse ready. And in New Zealand and elsewhere in the world, the importance of the breeding sector. So there's always going to be frustrations because we all think that our activity is the most important one when you're trying to get in front of ministers. But I think it's really shown for some of us the value of the government understanding the industry, its role in the economy, the number of people that we employ, and the money that we generate. And I think we can't underestimate that. And I think in the past we perhaps haven't done as good a job as we might have of explaining some of that. And I think too, we've needed to be flexible and responsive.
Annamarie, we know that dealing with the government can be challenging at times. How have you found it during the COVID period?
Actually, it's been vital to us. But we have a great relationship. So unlike each jurisdiction, I think has a slightly different place where it sits. We sit within the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. So gambling and sport are there. So we're not under agriculture as racing is in many jurisdictions, except for when we look at horse movements. So, and our relationship with DCMS, with the department, is actually fantastic. They're enormously supportive. And I think that's evidenced in the fact that we were the first major sport to come back after lockdown, helped by the fact that our horses were still in training, so didn't need the 6 weeks of getting back into shape. But it was fantastic to be that. And for a while, we were the only live betting product, sporting product in the UK. And that relationship has continued. We've been involved and part of discussions all the way through. We've managed to embed our people into different working groups within the government. So particularly people like our doctor, Dr. Jerry Hill, is a critical part of the government's medical decision-making and response to COVID. And, also within the technological sort of innovations that we're looking at now under the new government working group. We've got Jerry and I think David Armstrong in there working with government under David Ross. So, those bits have been fantastic.
Winfried, I think you've touched on it already, the fact that the relationship between the Hong Kong Jockey Club and the government has been a really strong one, and what racing has done during the period seems to have only enhanced that.
I think definitely it helps if you contribute 7 to 8% of the budgets in revenue. That shows a certain relevance. But there is one issue which I think we communicated very early, that we have clear guiding principles that every activity we do will not create a public health risk. And that you can not only convince the finance minister, you have to convince the different health authorities that you have a very robust plan how you manage and proactively communicate with them on a daily basis. What we do will not create a public health risk and will not create a risk to your employees and customers. So that convincing case was extremely important, and that we are very reactive to different risk levels when you see an extension of number of cases, etc. But our challenge was not only the Hong Kong government. We have a training center in China, in Chongfa. So we had to keep 300 horses and employees, around 100 Hong Kong employees who were practically stuck for 7-8 months in China. And how you have a cross-border transport. The horses were not the problem. The human beings who accompanying the horses, the driver, the grooms, the veterinary staff who, in a way, accompanies the horses on a 4-hour, 5-hour journey. So how you convince, in Hong Kong, there is a clear public interest, but how you convince, and in levels from mainland Chinese government in Peking, in Guangdong, in Guangzhou, and in Chongfa, how you convince them what you do is responsible and that it's in their public interest. So that, in a way, was interesting, a challenge where you practically even had to react overnight on changes in cross-border movements and how you arrange this and how you convince people to support your activity across the border. And we have been fortunately established on multiple levels this understanding of what we do and why we do this. But I personally think it has been even more crystallized, even in our mind, that you cannot have only a ministerial understanding what you do, that you have it on 4 or 5 different levels and continuing practicing dialogues with, in a way, your counterparts to convince them that racing should continue and that this is in the public interest.
Agreed. Winfried, how have the travel and transportation bans affected Hong Kong racing?
I think, first of all, with horses, in a way, if you bring 400-500 horses regular in, so that's a real concern. But we found a very innovative solution with grooms rally. So flight from Australia, horses go in the plane, arrive in Hong Kong airport, handed over to Hong Kong grooms. And then we had retired horses who went from Hong Kong in the plane, going back in a way for the retirement farm in Australia. So that was helpful. And we plan Hong Kong international races, the Longines Hong Kong international races, we plan to have them as really an intercontinental event. And we have very good responses from major trainers around the world who would like to come. And we have now in place that we have special quarantine facilities for grooms who will come. They would have to come 2 weeks earlier. And then the horse flies over, they take over the horse then. They would have to, likely when they go back, to do quarantine in the country. And we talk at the moment about jockeys to introduce a special health protocol that they maybe have to do only 1 week. All our jockeys are tested 4 times a week on COVID. And we want to introduce the same in a way with overseas jockey coming, that they're tested twice before they leave. When they arrive in Hong Kong, they go in a special dedicated Hong Kong Jockey Club facility in Bees River in quarantine. And that would be a week. And we have probably 5, 6 top international jockeys who have committed to come for our international races, if not something in the circumstances changes. So I'm optimistic that we can find solution, but we have to really be creative and how we, in a way, try to keep the international racing going. So from this respect, I'm optimistic. And we had, even in the beginning of the season, we could convince 3, 4 top international jockeys to come to be permanent fixtures in Hong Kong, because our advantage is that, first of all, we did not have to cut the prize money. And our races is therefore, it's very attractive for a jockey to come. And therefore, that was helped us to keep our international profile, because we are very clear, we don't want to have only local races. We have to, especially with our commingling, which is now 20% of our turnover, we have to have an international product with the best jockeys and horses from around the world.
The impact on what's happening now with the breed itself, and I think, Annamarie, you mentioned about how the bloodstock, the breeding aspect of things may be affected long term, and what that may result in, whether it's end up fixtures, reduced field sizes. You know, how do we look to prepare for that potential eventuality, Victoria?
We're monitoring it very closely. It's still a little too early for us to see the impact on calendar planning or race planning. And at the moment, we're able to maintain field sizes at around, well, we've got very large fields at the moment, and that's remaining a focus. But we're keenly aware of the real risk of smaller foal crops. And statistically, that's what we've been watching for the last 10 years. So it's something that we're all paying close attention to, because there is a real risk that as more people face financial hardship, there may be a reduced number of owners who are willing to invest in horses. And certainly in New Zealand, we do have lots of syndicates. So we're looking at, as a code, we are looking at the calendar, at a real range of ways that we can keep racing exciting and something that everybody wants to remain a part of. So I think that's a journey for us, but it's not new territory for us. It's something that we've been observing for the last 5-10 years as stakes have been reducing. And COVID's just another element of that that's made us a little bit sharper and perhaps more keenly focused on how do we keep everybody interested in thoroughbreds.
I guess, Annamarie, the thing is that we feel that potentially this COVID, as Victoria is saying, might just help shrink the business model of racing a little bit more, and the long-term effects that that's going to have. Could we potentially find ourselves in a difficult situation? Could we prepare for that?
Well, we have to be preparing for it. I think, you know, in the UK, we're a major net importer anyway of foals. So clearly our foal crops are likely to be affected, but it may mean that we're also importing less. The obvious one that Victoria's already mentioned is adjusting the fixture lists, and we do that on an annual basis and an ongoing basis at any rate to look at trying to keep our field sizes up for lots of good reasons, but not just the international competitiveness, but also because of the betting and things. But I think that the key here is that we need to make major efforts, particularly in the UK, to retain our owners and to stimulate new owners, and to look at syndication and fractional ownership better, and to make that ownership experience much, much better. I think we've got a lot of other programs going on around welfare. We work a lot with the betting industry to try and make sure our product is exciting for people to engage with. But we really need people to want to be associated with racing, to see it as a great thing, for people, for the public to understand why it's important to us and why the horse is important to us and to our society. So, we're doing a lot of work across a lot of different sort of areas, but I do think that ownership is absolutely key to this and people wanting to be part of this fantastic sport.
Winfried, with this in mind, do you feel that this is a threat potentially years down the line to the situation in Hong Kong at all?
I think if you look at Hong Kong, we are probably in a different situation that we import 100% of our horses. So therefore, but we import only 400 or 500. So I think for us, the import, it should not be that major issue, because even if the world horse population on foals reduces by 10, 15 or 20%, that is not the issue for us. But we see in a way as an issue, and this comes back to the global industry, that if you look now, I predict that 2021, you will see a decline in foal production around 10 to 15%. So, and the biggest issue, and then probably the effect of this, we see only in the year 2023. So therefore, we have, in this respect, a little bit time to adjust. But the biggest issue, and I agree with Annamarie, is owners, because that comes back with economic shrinking. I personally think with QE2 policy, making money, all assets inflated, and horse prices have gone up to a level which I personally think were unhealthy. So we will see, because for ownership experience, I think we get a adjustment, which maybe is even in the long-term interest more relevant, because even if you look at stallions who don't race as 4-year-olds, who goes as 3-year-olds, because you can make much more money from syndicating, keeping them in a way than as stallions, and maybe they will run longer. So I think maybe there are some other effects, but the biggest challenge, I think, is to keep the owner's interest. Because if you don't have, even with a reduction of number of foals and horses in training, the economic impact for the whole industry and the chain from trainers, jockeys, stable staff is significant. So the key focus has to be how to keep the owner's interest. Because if you don't have this, then in a way the impact could be a spiral where you would end up a level which you would not like to be. So I completely agree. Owner's interest is key. And the other one, we have to adjust, because this is an economic cycle we had before 2008, financial crisis, 1998. These shocks come. But now it is really the focus on the owner to keep the interest in the sport and keep horses in training, which I think is one of the focuses everybody around the world has.
Annamarie, in its very raw sense, the owners, the punters, the race fans that go, they are responsible for bringing finance to the sport. It's as simple as that, if you want to be honest about it. And without them, we're going to struggle.
Yeah, we are. I would say that, the single most important thing for us at the moment is getting racegoers back on the racecourse. The single biggest thing, both financially and in terms of publicity and in terms of the long-term good of the sport. So we have a massive focus on that for us over the next few weeks and months, I suppose. We've got, in order to grow those numbers and bring new people in, that's what we need. But, we've got really good evidence that the fixture list and the way we've adapted the fixture list and worked both with the Irish authorities to try and make sure we've got as much racing on TV as possible is really working. And that's kept people engaged, I think. And as Victoria was saying, some of the really good stories, great to see Holly Doyle, one of our female jockeys, being nominated for the Sportswoman of the Year awards, for example, this year. So getting those stories into wider, more mainstream sports stories is going to be really important. It is going to be a very long time before we see normality. And even when we get to a point where we've got vaccines or other technological solutions, we don't know if people are going to have the confidence to come back to the race courses in big numbers and the big numbers that we need. So as Winfried's been saying, we need to be really pushing the health side of this, the careful, really good protocols we've got in place to make sure that race courses are the safest place you can be at the moment. And really talking to everybody about the innovations that we're making, about the excitement of racing, and pushing the good news stories the whole time.
Well, this has been fantastic chatting to you all three this morning. Thank you so much for sparing the time. Winfried, Victoria, Annamarie, it has been revealing more than anything else to hear your thoughts on so many different subjects. So appreciate it. Thank you all very much. We're talking today about preparing for and sustaining racing post-COVID-19, and I guess the only way to talk about preparing for it is to understand where we're at now and perhaps get an idea of the vulnerabilities that the pandemic has highlighted for the sport in various jurisdictions. Drew, if I start with you, and perhaps you can give us an idea of what the pandemic has done to reveal weaknesses, for example, in the US.
Well, again, thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. COVID-19 has obviously been devastating for the world and for major sports in general. Racing in the US, though, was uniquely positioned because, as we know, these horses require daily care, regardless of what's going on in the environment. And so to take them from taking care of these horses on the backstretch to actually running, there wasn't a big difference. And so fortunately, racing was able to continue on a limited basis during COVID-19. And we saw a significant increase in mainstream television coverage. We were approximately over 700 hours on mainstream networks in addition to the 24-hour TVG coverage, which gave racing a unique opportunity to promote itself and generate new fans and have significant wagering. So while it's been terrible and devastating, it's uniquely positioned horse racing in a positive spot to grow the fan base.
That's great to hear. Horacio, what about in South America? And from your perspective, what did the pandemic do for the sport?
What is positive for us is that COVID-19 put on the table everything was wrong in the past in the region, yeah, and this is positive because it's a mentality process. We are far away from to have an international mentality. Few people understand what is happening in another countries, important countries, but the situation will be really bad next year. Why next year? Because we still been in quarantine. Yeah, in South America in general. We have the breeding industry is suffering a lot. They are closing horse farms, important ones. So now we are afraid to have a concentration of breeders, few breeders, important ones. That this is not a good news. Sales are adapting to what the market is. We depends of the economy of the countries. In the case of one of it's not one of them, it's the most important horse racing country in South America, that is Argentina. We have 50% now of people below poverty line. Yeah, so the economy, it has a huge influence from what happened in the industry. Positive, maybe the authorities, I listen that now they are leasing the industry and they are approving in fast tracks for the racetrack to have online systems. And I think the authorities will try to help. Yeah, but the industry, another good things, no, I don't find. Everything is we need to have whole mind. We need to have good professional people, and we need to try to understand that the world is going in a different direction. So we need to be careful to don't be out someday in the horse industry. It's a very delicate situation.
We'll talk perhaps about moving forward from COVID-19 and what we may be able to do, what we may be able to learn. But Brian, for the situation in Ireland, how did COVID-19 affect the racing scene? especially in those early months?
Yeah, pretty similar to what Drew had outlined, Rishi. We stopped racing at the end of March, the 26th of March, and we were shut down for about 11 weeks. We resumed on the 8th of June. And at that time, we lost about 81 fixtures, which would be about a quarter of our annual fixture list. On resumption on June, we were able to reinstate about half those fixtures that were lost. And we've been racing since the 8th of June, pretty much non-stop up until now. And it's gone well. I think racing has proven surprisingly resilient, I think, through the pandemic for us in Ireland. The good thing was that, the time it hit was awful in terms of the breeding season, but we were able, with the support of our government, we were able to keep the breeding season going. So the same number of foals will be born in Ireland next year as would have been born, if COVID had never happened. Trainers were permitted to continue training, obviously, from a horse welfare point of view. The horses needed to be exercised. And owners stayed loyal with the trainers. In fact, our horses in training numbers are slightly up year on year at this stage. So those elements of the industry kept going and have proven very resilient. And there's some positives in that. The area that's obviously been hardest affected is the whole racecourse situation. We've raced without customers now since the 8th of June, and realistically looking forward, and the roadmap the government have set out for managing the virus, it's unlikely we will have patrons on the track again for some time yet. So our attendances at the moment are limited to 200 people, mainly owners. But I think overall, Rishi, we've been pleasantly surprised at how resilient racing is, but not underestimating the scale of the challenges, particularly in the racecourse sector.
There's no doubt that resilience is a characteristic that I think a lot of people have needed through this spell. Drew, you've already touched on some of the positives, or a positive to emerge as part of that resilient bounce back from the early stages of COVID. Perhaps you could expand a little bit more on some positives to emerge that you think COVID has helped push along in the right direction.
Well, I think with probably every sport, and particularly racing, we went from having tens of thousands of fans to racetracks on a daily basis to everybody watching from home. And not only in a made-for-TV sort of event, but also with new emerging technology in what we call the second screen, I think that everybody's glued to all the time. And how can you interact television with the second screen to really immerse the customer in that racetrack experience? And I mean, I'm always a fan of, if you want to get someone new in the business and show them the passion of the sport and the passion for racing, I think the easiest way to do that is to take them to either morning workouts or the racetrack so they can get up close with the horse and see the beauty of the athlete. But while we couldn't do that during COVID, I think we've all adapted to modern technology and to try and immerse that customer or that fan as if they were at the track. And I think that's probably going to be a challenge moving back, because fans for now, they're saying, hey, I can watch racing from my backyard and have a television back there. And so as an industry, we need to be prepared for now when we're ready to safely conduct racing with large fans again. And again, I think everybody's putting the safety and welfare of their fans and athletes and patrons first and foremost. When we're ready, we need to make sure that the tracks are open and encouraging people and give them a reason to get back and not watch from their home. And so I think that's probably one of the challenges we'll have ahead. But racing's done a fantastic job. We're very resilient, as Brian pointed out. We've been around for hundreds of years. We've survived world wars. We've survived pandemics. We will continue to run strong. And I think when we're going to continue to emerge with new technologies so that fan and the owner can still feel the passion of the thoroughbred.
Brian, you've already touched on resilience. How has that resilience manifested itself in specific positives?
I think the two positives I would say are first of all, and sometimes we're very hard on ourselves. Racing is constantly looking in the mirror and analysing itself, and we talk about being marginalised as a sport, etc., etc. But I think one thing that has come out of this is racing is liked, it's popular. There's a demand for it. There's an interest in it. We were the first sport that was permitted to come back here in Ireland, and I think that's been the case in in a number of other countries, and we experienced the same as a lot of other countries in terms of an increased level of TV coverage and an increased level of viewing and an increased level of betting. So, you can take heart from the fact that there was an absence of negativity about the sport. People were glad to see it back, and people missed it. I think the other important one from our point of view, and I suspect this is the case in other countries as well, in our discussions with government to be allowed to resume racing, and it was a very different type of discussion than we've ever had before with government. I think there's now a clear understanding and appreciation of the industry here in Ireland. It's we're constantly engaging with government about our industry and about our sport, and from a country the size of ours, it's a significant industry, particularly on the breeding side. And I think now, both government and politicians across the board, in the efforts and the work we were doing to allow racing to resume, have a stronger and better appreciation of the industry, of its value, of its importance.
And we'll talk more about negotiations and communications with government a little bit later on. But just going back to something that you mentioned, Drew, and obviously you held up your mobile phone and you talked about how things have had to change and how people around the world have used technology to help perhaps modernize a little bit. Do you feel that that's been the case, and are we exploiting perhaps technology enough with the situation?
Well, I think absolutely we need to exploit technology even more. I think that's critical to our business for survival with any industry. Things like the Breeders' Cup, for example, this year. We're planning to have what we call the back camera, which is a camera that's on two cranes that swings across. We'll have more television cameras than we ever have had before in the Breeders' Cup, so that we can get all angles of every horse as much as possible. We're going to have a virtual reality camera in the walking ring, so that people that can't be there, it's if they were there. And some of that will be through television, but a lot of that will be through the second screen, your mobile device. And I think someone told me a year ago, and it's resonated with me for a long time, that the average person scrolls on their screen the height of the Empire State Building every single day. So even though you're on the screen, you need to make sure what's on the screen is creative and innovative to really capture the audience's attention.
This is the world that we have got used to living in, scrolling on screens all day long, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. Horacio, what about your views on modern technology and whether you feel that anything has been used to benefit the sport since COVID took over?
We have some technology in some of the countries, but it's not enough. What is really that we need to work as soon as possible to incorporate more technology. We need at the same time to work with the media. South America is not exactly the best example to work with media. We need to have media beside us to try to maintain customers, the interest of customers. We don't know when the customers, when our clients will start to come back to the race tracks. Yeah. So and don't forget, we still been in the worst moment for the quarantine and for what is happening with COVID-19. So it's a long process. We have time. We need to work trying to get technology, not just for betting. This is principle. It's a main issue. Yeah. We need technology for to capture customers, young people, and that's, it takes time. You need to have the money, yeah. But technology is one of the top issues for us. If we don't resolve this in the near future, the industry will suffer a lot. No?
Yes, you can't stand still, Brian, can you? You've got to be thinking about moving ahead, and COVID has obviously focused people's minds on moving ahead and bettering in certain aspects. And technology is one that I think people feel has improved. Have you found anything in particular in Ireland that has struck a chord?
Yeah, that's a great phrase, Drew. I must remember that the scrolling. We scroll the height of the Empire State Building every day. I have to admit I'm guilty as charged on that one. I'd hate to think how high the kids could go with their scrolling, but yeah, I same thing, a similar. I mean, a lot of a big increase in our betting, our streaming numbers. The number of streams of Irish racing jumped by 40%. Once racing went behind closed doors, and I think that's accelerated a process that was probably there already. We've seen a 30% increase in our international sales of Irish racing. And just as an example, our Irish Champions Weekend, Longines Irish Champions Weekend, the pari mutual handle for the weekend was on a par with last year, despite not having 25,000 people on track. So they're all good things. I think on technology, we've moved our marketing message from come to the races, come to the event, to how to explain racing, how to understand racing, how to enjoy it better. And one example which we found very good was every year for the last number of years we've organised a very popular Trainers Open Day where people come to trainers' yards and they see horses and they get up close to the horses. Obviously with restrictions that wasn't possible this year, so we moved it to a virtual open week where we staged a series of webinars throughout the whole week about different aspects of owning horses, training horses, being in the yard with horses. And I think what we've seen is that the trainers themselves are finding out that people owning a horse, the race day experience is important, but it's only one element of the experience.
Absolutely. Another area where there's deeper involvement is with the government and authorities. That communication and negotiations have been really important. Horacio, what about in South America? How easy have those discussions with the government and authorities been? And has there been anything positive coming out of it?
The case of Argentina, yes, was positive. The regulators that are the authorities are listening more than in the past. Sometimes the obstacles we have with authorities is that they don't understand horse racing, and they don't understand inclusive horse racing domestically. So imagine if you speak internationally. So they are listening. They are trying to approve several issues that will give another tools to the racetracks to have a better operation, mainly in wagering. Yeah. But in general, in South America, the most important country whose authorities really are very involved and has commitments is Uruguay. This is since many years ago. So it's easy to speak with them because they are involved, they understand. Chile is the second one, but it's not easy. You need to work a lot with them. COVID-19 will help. Yeah, will help. Brazil is not an easy one. Yeah. What we need to understand, and everybody needs to understand in South America, is that we need to work together. Sometimes the racetracks believes they are competing between themselves. Yeah. And so because of this, they have some protagonists. They don't have a real team, so it's not easy to speak with authorities because one guy says something and another one say another completely different issue. And what needs to happen is that the main people who speak with authorities need to understand what is happening in the rest of the world. If these people who needs to speak with authorities doesn't understand 100% what is going on outside the region, will not be easy to obtain anything from the government, and we will be out of the system someday because the rest of the countries, the main countries, are working in a different path, it's different way, yeah, and we can say that we are behind many years from this country, so we need to be really careful. But this is a moment to have a real team with the right people speaking with authorities, because we need to change as soon as possible certain rules, certain legislations, and certain issues because if not, will be a real problem in the future.
Drew, do you believe that maybe this COVID situation has helped strengthen any relations between the authorities and those that racing has to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, racing is already a highly governmentally regulated industry. And so we routinely talk to government officials. But with COVID-19, I think that level of communication was significantly increased, with the same goal of everybody is to make people sure they're safe. And we routinely discuss with local officials, state officials. I've spoken to the governor of Kentucky on multiple occasions since the Breeders' Cup is going to be here this year, and also had the opportunity to speak to the President of the United States, who was taking an interest in sport. And that was a conversation where there was CEOs from the various sports industries in the U.S., with the CEO of the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, the PGA, the USTA Tennis Association. And so the level of communication has never been more.
Brian, I think one of the interesting areas watching it unfold in Ireland was obviously knowing that there's some jurisdictions that, say the UK, for example, fall under sport, in Ireland, agriculture, and how it must be to deal with the sport of horse racing in that perspective. How was it for you?
Yeah, it was good. I think the good thing, just like Drew said there, we engage with government on a different level, and the satisfying thing from our point of view is they looked deep at racing, a long, hard, existential look almost, and said, yes, this is worth saving, this is worth fighting for. We worked through the Department of Agriculture, and we're far more comfortable in that environment. There's a risk, we feel, in terms of just packaging racing as a sport alongside other sports. Very difficult to justify the funding basis for racing in our country, just if you take racing as a sport, because it's a relatively small sport. We stage 360, 370 fixtures a year. The real justification, for the support which government gives to our sector in Ireland is the breeding industry. As you know, we're the third largest breeder of thoroughbreds in the world. That creates a lot of rural employment, creates a lot of jobs, creates a lot of exports. And that's a very strong message for us to government. And that's why we're positioned as an agricultural activity, farming activity, and a lot of rural jobs. We would always feel far more comfortable in that environment than just with other sports. At times there's disadvantages to it, because when, as Drew said, the group of sports are going to meet the political leaders, we're not in that group. So we have to make our own running, and we have to make our own ground. On the other hand, there's advantages, because you tend to get into comparisons of funding bases with all sports, and particularly sports that have a higher level of participation and a higher level of interest.
Horacio, one negative about COVID has been the decrease in international travel and getting people and animals and livestock around. So how has that had an impact on the industry in South America?
For you to have an example, we still having closed the airport in Argentina. So few flights are coming or going from Argentina to another country. Movement of horses were very difficult. To export is not easy, mainly because some countries have different, many currency change. Yeah, and we have so to export a horse in Argentina, for example, you lose money. Yeah, it's just because you have one official currency change when you export legally. The horse. But when you want to go to real dollars, you lose 50% of the amount of money they pay. So affect a lot. Don't forget that we have shuttles, stallions, sires, from the north to mainly from United States or from Europe, to South America countries. So yes, affect a lot. Yeah, and will continue affecting this maybe until March. Yeah, But January or February, yes, it's affecting. Yeah.
Drew, particularly with your Breeders' Cup hat on, you'll be acutely aware of what the travel bans, respectively, around the world have brought about as challenges, not just obviously for movement, but also for competition and participation.
Yeah, well, I mean, as an international event, as soon as COVID hit, we started preparing for it and making sure that, to the extent it was possible, we could get horses and the essential personnel to travel safely to the Breeders' Cup. And again, as everybody's pointed out, we've had great dialogue with government officials, the Department of Homeland Security, and are confident and remain confident that we'll be able to get those horses over to the Breeders' Cup this year with the essential personnel. That said, everything can change on a daily basis, and I think that reinforces the emphasis on having up-to-date information, always taking safety first, and working with government officials to make sure you're in compliance.
Brian, what about from your perspective with regards to the travel situation and competition?
So again, just the resilience point, Rishi, I think, started off desperate and we were all just glad to be back racing, and if it was domestic only for the first few weeks, well and good. But very quickly, we adapted, we found a way to travel the horses, Irish horses out and overseas horses back in. Now we've got the jockeys. As I said earlier, the breeding industry kept going through it. So, to me, international competition is the lifeblood of racing. I'm delighted to see the list of intended travellers to Drew's meeting in a few weeks' time. We had five or six was a win and you're in races on Champions Weekend, and I think most of those winners are pointed at the Breeders' Cup races. Likewise, the shuttle stallions got down to Australia, which was important for the breeding industry, and now I think there's about 30 or 35 European horses already down there training for the carnival. So the more of that we have, the better. Talking to Winfried, the Hong Kong international races again are going to be fully open, I think, for international competition. And I think that's great. And it also means, it shows the government is confident that they feel, if Drew's able to persuade the US authorities that it's safe to bring horses from Europe, from Britain, from Ireland, from France, and the personnel attached to them, that's a big credit to the racing industry that we're seeing in that light. So, I think it's a huge problem, and really racing, at times when we resumed, in some countries, certain countries, there was, keep this to ourselves. Don't let overseas runners in. Don't, they're only going to come and win our prize money and this sort of stuff. That's the wrong attitude in my view. It's international competition that raises the bar, keeps things interesting, and I think we've found a way around it, which is great.
Horacio, if we move on and talk about the knock-on effect of certain elements that maybe long-term would cause concern, say, for example, with size of crops for certain countries with regards to foals, and then how that translates into field sizes and then fixtures later on. Is there a worry? Is there any way that we can prepare for what impact of COVID may be couple of years, 3-4 years down the line?
What will happen is that we will have in the future less runners. This will happen because this has a link with the breeding industry. Yeah, because the breeding industry is suffering right now because two main issues. We cut prize money in general. Yeah, prize money is less than before, and because sales are not exactly the same that were also before. So we will produce less horses, that's for sure. And having less runners in the future, we need to be really careful and to have the focus to don't change. To don't have affected the main races, yeah, that are exactly the ones we are protecting with the right side, yeah, the field side, yeah. So we need to can change yes, we need to have a focus there to try to don't have a negative effect in the future. But
Brian, are you worried at all about the knock-on effect and sort of 3-4 years down the line what this COVID challenge may have?
No, I think it's a challenge. Yeah, I mean, it's something we have to be aware of. There's also opportunity there as well, and to me, the key thing in this is ownership. We have got to drive and promote and market the joys, the pleasure, the attraction of owning racehorses. And that's down to offering decent prize money, good levels of prize money, and good experiences for owners on the track and through their trainers all the way. And when you see that, you see some of the most successful people in business, absolutely smitten by horse racing and the joy of owning a winning horse. We've got to push that message all the way. That's really what drives the whole thing. If we don't have owners, then we won't have a reason to breed horses. We won't have a reason to have trainers. We won't have a reason. So to me, the effort over the next 5 years has got to be really driving ownership, driving prize money, driving the attraction of having horses in training. The world is going to get a much smaller place. We've got a significant influx of international owners in Ireland this year, particularly US owners who have been successful. And with Brexit on the horizon, we've deliberately tried to expand our horizon in terms of the ownership profile in Ireland. So there is a worry there, Rishi. There's a challenge, but I think there's also an opportunity. And look, we have to be optimistic that this curve will rise again. There'll be another side to this COVID pandemic, and we need to be ready at that stage to advertise and promote what we have. And I think we'll understand it a bit better ourselves at that stage because of what we've learned during this situation.
Drew, how concerned are you about the situation in the States about potentially smaller crops for foals, then the knock-on effect for field sizes and fixtures? Is that something that's come into the thoughts of the main players in America?
Well, I mean, I think there's one, challenges, but two, opportunities. And it's how we address the opportunities and leverage those as a business that will get us through this. I mean, as we've talked early on, adopting as much technology as we can and continuing to emerge and innovate the sport will continue to grow our fan base and grow our ownership group. And I think second, as far as a challenge, reiterate, once fans are allowed to go back to the racetrack, we just need to make sure that it's the best experience they can possibly get. And so there's not an excuse or reason to stay at home. And, we're going to continue to work on all those. But I think the best thing about our sport, it's very, very resilient. It is filled with passionate people that love these beautiful creatures. And we've made it through world wars. We've made it through equine disease, droughts, you name it. And racing is still going. And I think, this is an opportunity for us where fan base is increasing, viewership, is increasing, and we need to continue to leverage those to address some of the challenges that we've talked about.
Yeah, I would endorse what you're saying. Having been back at the races quite a few times, the one thing that I do miss, and as cheesy as it may sound, miss people being there, miss their reactions, their emotions to bounce off that in terms of broadcasting at least. So thank you all very much. Really insightful stuff, and I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi.